Excellent. So let's give it a start. I would like to welcome you to this virtual roundtable on AI extremism. I would like to thank all the attendees for their interest in the event and for joining. My name is Stefan Bale, as you can see written there. I'm professor of international studies at the Catholic University of Louvain in Belgium. And I'm very glad to host this event for VOX-Pol. VOX-Pol is a very large now network of researchers who analyze online extremism. If you're not familiar with the VOX-Pol network, I really invite you to explore the website VOX-Pol.eu to consider all the other events we're organizing, such as lecture series, but also the resources that we create, such as VOX-Pol reports and all kinds of links and resources to anyone involved in researching or being a practitioner on online extremism. This event also stems from a research project called Extreme Identities, or ExID, which is a project that I led, funded by a European Union NORFACE grant. The NORFACE initiative funds a very large research consortia dedicated to study challenges to democratic governance today. So if you're interested in all the projects that have been done, fascinating things, so on topics such as political polarization and so on, I invite you to see the NORFACE governance website. It's norface-governance.eu. But today we are going to really focus on AI extremism. So what is AI extremism? What are we going to discuss and talk about? Well, we can take AI extremism as an umbrella concept that would encompass all the phenomena, very diverse, the dynamics, the structures, the processes that result from the connection between extremism and artificial intelligence. So, as we know, on the one hand, we have online extremism, which has been really growing quite massively, unfortunately, over the past 2 decades. It has also become extremely diverse. And it has really created an extremely large online environment or ecosystem, which has become extremely hard, if not impossible, to map and to chart. And that has also, and I guess we're going to talk about that, multiple connections with non-extremist online ecosystems and environments, which makes the mapping and also some of the processes very hard to comprehend. So that's on the one side, we have a growing online extremist ecosystem. On the other hand, we have AI that has grown massively over the past 3-4 years or so. Really progresses have been dramatically improving. And this is due to, of course, extremely high financial investment that has led to ever-increasing technical infrastructures and power of the AI models. So just to give you a couple of numbers here, because I think they encapsulate this technological revolution that's unfolding in front of our eyes. I'll start with private investment in AI spin-offs. Expressed in 2021 US dollars, private investment in AI totaled $8 billion in 2013, 8 billion. In 2016, it was $60 billion. Yeah. In 2019, it was $130 billion. So what we are seeing is a continuously growing investment in AI infrastructure and projects. Now, the second number I would like to share is the computing power that's associated with AI projects nowadays. It is not comparable to the kind of computing power that was around even 15 or 20 years ago. Here are some numbers. The computation used to train AI models in 2003, okay, so that's 20 years ago, was around 1 petaflop per model. Yeah. Now, in 2022, the model Palm 2 was running on 2.53 billion petaflops, and the GPT-4 boasts twice that number. So we're moving from 1 petaflop to about 5 billion petaflops. So this tells you that as a result, some of these models have, as we all witness in our everyday lives, reached very high levels of performance. And they have unlocked a range of new discoveries, opportunities, such as finding new molecules for curing diseases, but also simultaneously, of course, they have triggered very grave concerns about the dark side of the technology, as every single technology beforehand, such as the internet. And it has already started to create serious problems. So we face, in a way, a Janus-based technology in which we have extremely beneficial applications of the technology, but also very nefarious applications of the technology. And this Janus-based character of AI has been, as I'm sure you've seen, recently acknowledged by the Bletchley Declaration, in which 28 states and the European Union have come together to think of international cooperation on the maleficent uses of AI. And that was 1 month ago. So schematically speaking, I think we see 3 types of connection between AI growing online and extremism and its ever-increasing capabilities. One can think about these 3 connections. First, AI can assist extremism. It can provide new opportunities for extremists. Second, AI can help detect extremism. And third, AI can perhaps also help disrupt extremism. To assist, to detect, and to disrupt, I think these are the 3 types of major connections between extremism and AI that we're going to discuss today. Our panelists are going to, I think, each in his or her own way, going to focus more on one or the other type of connections. So very briefly, before I cede the floor to the panelists, just one word on each of these types of connections. First, AI can assist extremists. I'm not going to go into too much detail here because it's going to be covered, but sure, we can immediately see how generative AI can assist in, for example, produce extremist content. Those of us who have followed the Dublin riots a week ago have seen that on social media there was a lot of AI-generated images, but also text that was encouraging people to riot and to join the movement. So that's just one example, but there are others that we're going to discuss today. But there are also less obvious possibilities that generative AI offers extremists. Impersonation, blackmail, creation of content designed to create misperceptions from states, for example. So we have here an array, a rich array of possibilities through which generative AI can actually assist extremist agendas. But it's not just generative AI that can assist extremist projects. We can also think of decision-making models that can power drones in their to become autonomous weapons, basically detecting targets and taking the decision to strike them. There's a well-discussed report from the experts on the conflict in Libya that asserts, a report by the panel of experts at the UN that affirms that a loitering munition autonomously killed and attacked a convoy 2 years ago in Libya. So that's already one example, but also some other concerning things. If you follow the scientific literature, you will have seen that biomedical researchers have altered the parameters of their model that they designed to find non-toxic molecules to cure several diseases. And by altering this, they discovered 40,000 chemical compounds which are highly toxic. Among the compounds they discovered by the model were sarin gas, VX gas, and Novichok, and scores of others. So these models, we can immediately understand how they can be misused. As we say, they can be the target of dual use by extremists or violent terrorist actors. But fortunately, AI can also be used to detect extremism and not just to assist extremist projects. So we know about efforts to build AI classifiers that can, in huge corpora, detect, find specific kinds of language, but also specific objects, visual tropes such as neo-Nazi symbols, or specific anti-Semitic memes, for example. And this can assist us when we face very large media environment to immediately detect where extremism is flourishing. And finally, AI to disrupt extremism. I think this is a possibilities that the technology offers us, not just to monitor and detect, but also to disrupt. To disrupt what? To disrupt online spaces, communications, but also financial flows, for example. AI offers us a series of possibilities to fight against extremism that we need to perhaps explore more actively. So from these three types of connections, there are, as I said, a myriad of new opportunities for extremists, but also for people who study or try to counter and tackle extremism. And unfortunately, many of these opportunities, many of the efforts to examine these opportunities remain so far quite superficial and vague, such as the Bletchley Declaration, a good important step, but extremely vague in how it talks about the problem, how it diagnoses some of the specific issues. And academic research is also very scarce yet and fragmented. And so this is why we decided at VOX-Pol to convene this roundtable, to bring experts together, to share information between academics and civil society experts, but also to practitioners from police forces, or NGOs, or other security and intelligence services and journalists. This roundtable is also a taster for an extensive report on AI extremism upcoming early next year, if all goes well, and which will be hopefully sooner than later on the VOX-Pol website after the new year. So let me know if you want to be kept informed of this publication. Otherwise, keep looking for the VOX-Pol website. So here we have, and I have to say I'm extremely glad about this, we have an outstanding lineup of individuals who have not just some ideas and insights and thoughts of AI extremism, but they have also first-hand knowledge, empirical work on this topic, working with AI models, on the use of AI by extremists and the like. Before I leave them the floor, let me therefore briefly introduce each speaker to you. And I will do so in the order in which they are going to present. First, we have Marie Schröter. She is the country director of the Friedrich Hebert Stiftung, so foundation in the Philippines. And she's here calling from Manila, if I'm right, Marie. So thanks, I think it's 9 o'clock over there. So thanks for the effort. Before joining the Philippines, she focused on the role of AI in counterterrorism as a Mercator Fellow with the United Nations Office of Counterterrorism in New York, but also with the ICSR at King's College London and Algorithm Watch in Berlin. She's the co-founder in 2020 of CoDetect. It's an organization against online disinformation. And she also authored a report, which I invite you to read, called Artificial Intelligence and Countering Violent Extremism, a primer. And this is a good first step for everything related to this. And it's published by GNet on the GNet website. Second, we're going to have the pleasure to listen to Myron Nakomi. He's professor at the Institute of Political Sciences of the University of Silesia in Poland. And he's currently, I guess, in Milan. Myron is a visiting fellow indeed at the It's Time Research Center in Milan, Italy. He has held before that visiting positions at the University of Oxford and Cambridge, among others. And his primary research focus is on various aspects of political violence and terrorism on the internet. And he is, among others, the author of a very recent article, which is, I believe, one of the very first academic articles published in a peer-reviewed journal that really tries to chart some of the possibilities offered by AI to extremists. It's been published recently in Studies in Conflict and terrorism. I invite you to check this out. Then we have Thomas Egghammer, who is senior fellow at All Souls College in Oxford. He's a political scientist, historian, and he has a specialization in militant Islamism and jihadism. He's the author of a range of articles and books on the topic. If you haven't read his work, I strongly encourage you to go at his book, for example, Jihadi Culture, which is a major piece of work. And also, more recently, his biography of jihadist Abdullah Hazam, a book called The Caravan, which is very good indeed. He has recently deployed computational AI methods for the study of extremist corpora, including in Arabic, with 2 papers mentioned in the webpage dedicated to this event. So this will be of great interest for you who want to enhance their method skills if you face extremist content and want to use AI and computational methods to study that. Finally, we'll have the pleasure to conclude the presentations with Lewis Brace. He's senior lecturer in computational social sciences at the University of Exeter, where he is the co-director of the Center for Computational Social Science, which I guess is the brand new name of what was formerly called the Q-Step Center for Quantitative Social Sciences. His work, published in journals such as Terrorism and Political Violence or the Journal of Policing, Intelligence and Counterterrorism, harnesses a range of computational methods such as open source intelligence, AI models, and object recognition to detect and analyze extremist content, but also cybercrime. Each of them is going now to give you a short presentation. They're going to keep it under 10 minutes, straight to the point. Please post your question in the Q&A chat, which you will find here should be the case. And these questions will fuel the discussion that will follow the presentation. I've spoken for too long. And now I hand over to our first speaker, Marie. The floor is yours, Marie.
Thank you very much, Stefan. And hello to the fellow panelists and hello to our guests from, as far as I know, various places in the world. Thank you very much for having me on this panel. So as you know, I have less than 10 minutes, so I'm going to dive right into it. Stefan already said why it's relevant to look at AI, and I'm going to focus on how AI can be used for counterterrorism, especially for law enforcement agencies, for online content. I think it's very obvious why that could be interesting for law enforcement agencies. Not only did Stefan already say how much money went into AI and how we have seen so many developments, but also if you think about all the time that we are spending online. According to the latest research, it's almost half of the time of our free time that we're connected to devices, including the time that we also have to sleep. So obviously law enforcement agencies have to deal with masses of data that they have to shift through when it comes to counterterrorism, and that's posing challenges. So I'm focusing on 3 use cases. There are definitely more than that, but I think they deserve some highlights, and then I will also end with some warning signals on the nexus of AI and counterterrorism. So when the whole discourse started, I think a lot of people have the hope that AI will be the golden bullet, which will allow a shift from reactive methods in counterterrorism to more proactive ones, especially predictive policing and foresight models were very popular. So if you have that picture from the Minority Report, that very old movie in your mind, this is where I'm trying to hint at. A very big general AI will tell you that this individual ABC will commit extremist act or terrorist act in 20 minutes and this and that location. If we're looking at what AI is, which I understand as a discipline that tries to find technical solutions to mimic human behavior, whether that be planning, reasoning, strategizing, and that AI works especially well when lots of variables are known and we have a lot of data. you will hopefully follow me in the thought that predicting probabilities of individual behavior is not going so well. And we have also seen that with the piloting cases of predictive policing. There's simply not enough data and too many unknown concerns to make useful predictions. But there are other areas. So when we go away from the individual area and we're looking at more group-based behavior, we can see that some sorts of foresights can be helpful to understand networks, for example, terrorist networks. Make predictions on probabilities, always on probabilities, on splits of networks, for example. Or if you neutralize one of the nodes within a network, who could be the potential successor? How could that impact the overall lethality of a network? And another use case would be the connection of natural language processing, so everything that has to do with words, and social network analysis again, combined with open source material. We know that there are private companies that offer solutions which are able to flag potentially dangerous trends. So both of those positive examples help analysts in the field to prioritize in environments with limited resources and which law enforcement agencies does not have to deal with limited resources and prioritizing decisions. So the second use case is identifying vulnerable groups and matching them with de-radicalizing content. There's a British organization which has been kind of a front runner in that called Moonshot CVE, and they have become very popular for their redirection method. So they identified groups which are in early stages of radicalization based on their online search behaviors. So they cooperated with Google on that one, and then connected them with either self-help options to speak to psychologists, for example, but also with other positive messages and help for stress relief, or I think at some point also meditation examples. And it's hard to assess and how far that helped the individual, but it's visible that people engage significantly with that content, which I would read as a positive sign. There's also been an EU project called Red Alert. Maybe you're familiar with that. It was an answer from the EU to a very private sector dependent issue. And the idea behind the project was to provide a solution which definitely complies with EU values and norms, especially when it comes to privacy as well. So the idea of the system was to provide real-time alerts and identification of online terrorist content. And according to the final report of the EU, that project was successful. And it can also enhance cooperation because the model can run in different languages. But you have to know every national law enforcement agency would only use it by itself. So there's no built-in cooperation. The model does anonymize the data they're using. And later on, if you're registered as a different user on a higher level and you have more rights within your law enforcement agency, you can also de-anonymize it in order to more effectively operate on the intelligence that you have. So that's a positive account. However, I've also been speaking to a practitioner who was involved in piloting this, and there I got a more balanced assessment. So Red Alert is working with keywords. That means it would only work and surface material to content, people, stuff that's to some extent already known to the agency, which does not necessarily have to be a bad thing, because if we're looking at the examples, it's not unusual that extremists or terrorists have already been noticed at some point before they go into action. But it's a limitation of some sorts. The bigger failure, however, was that the results were often so clunky and with so many false positives that it was hard to work on. And I think the words of the practitioners were, it would have been made more sense to invest the same money into human resources instead of that software. So I leave you with those two assessments of it. And then the third use case, which is the less glamorous one, I'm afraid, but I think from my perspective, it holds the most potential. And that is using AI for analysts as a part of their toolbox to just make them more efficient and effective. Meaning, if you have gathered lawfully lots of data and you have to process it very quickly, that's where AI can come in. It can help you to visualize the data, to visualize network, to make connections between objects and time, identify pictures, face recognition, or as simply as that, just use automated translation to understand quicker what you have in front of you. So to my knowledge, there is no software solution within law enforcement agencies that combines all of that, meaning it's very down to the capabilities and tech savviness of the security agencies, whether they are able to use those resources and whether they are also able to allow those software solutions within their regulations. I cannot speak about AI and counterterrorism without highlighting that there are some difficulties as well. And you might know what I'm hinting towards. So there are huge concerns when it comes to privacy rights, because we're speaking about mass data. There are huge concerns about the right to non-discrimination. We know, and I think that's the most prominent case, that when it comes to face recognition, that works especially bad on members of the BAME community. And one has to wonder how to ensure that people are not suffering from that, because if you end up on a list of suspected terrorists or extremists, that has crossed a significant line with consequences for an individual. And the last one being the right to freedom of thought. People in democracies are allowed to express unintelligent thoughts online, whether we like it or not. So we have to ask ourselves going forward, who holds the knowledge and also the data? And there we have to speak when it comes to counterterrorism of the involvement of the private sector and how they cooperate with the public sector. But also in the meantime or mid-horizon, how we can increase capacity building within law enforcement agencies and change their regulations where necessary, that they're allowed to use certain tools which are out there. What's true for the offline world is also true for the online world. If there are no general definitions on what is extremist or terrorist content, you obviously create loopholes. And the beneficiaries of those are malicious actors at the end of the day. But this discussion is as old as the phenomenon. And the third point, AI governance. We have seen last week that the EU kickstarted its AI Act. This is the first step. It's groundbreaking. As usual, the devil is in the details. They have a risk-based approach, which goes hand in hand with certain responsibilities those providers have, and it's aiming at respecting European human rights. And I think it's worth monitoring that further. So to close, if you take one thought away from my intervention, I want you to think about how can we use technically safe, human rights compliant tools which are applied by a skilled workforce, not the golden bullet, less shining, but as part of the toolbox to counter terrorism. And now I would like to think about the fact whether my input was generated by ChatGPT or whether those were truly my thoughts. Okay, with that, over to you, Stephen.
Thank you. It's a very, very good question, but I would prefer, I will keep to the previous question, of course, very, very important, and all the takeaways that you summarized from your talk. Thank you, Marie. And without delay, we're moving to the other side of the struggle, because I think Myron is going to talk about not AI to counter terrorism, but AI as used by extremist actors. And Myron has a few slides. So over to you, Myron. Thank you very much for taking part in this roundtable.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I hope that the presentation, that the slides are visible. So, in my short intervention, I would like to discuss some of the findings of the research project online experiment that I carried out in the first half of 2023, that was focused on understanding whether open access chatbots and image generators can be practically utilized by terrorist organizations. So first of all, I was interested to learn whether chatbots. I was investigating two platforms with prompt engineering, namely ChatGPT and Bing Chat, whether they could be utilized to facilitate access to terrorist content. And there is a good news that in case of ChatGPT, it was almost impossible, which was not a surprising thing, given that ChatGPT has no direct access to internet communication. Although it was quite responsive to prompts related to Al Qaeda, and it could provide old addresses of Al Qaeda domains, which were active about 15, 20, 25 years ago. But it was, interestingly, it was not the case when it comes to other terrorist organizations, which may indicate that either the platform did not have enough data, or simply didn't want to share it with the users. And as for the Bing chat, again, the good news is that GPT-4 based Bing chat was much more resilient to prompt engineering compared to ChatGPT, which is a good thing. And about 99% of prompts were rejected due to security reasons. Although, by definition, it offers potentially more for terrorists and terrorist followers, given that it combines search engine capabilities with a chatbot functionality. So, as I mentioned, in most cases, these attempts gave nothing, although there was one critical error which demonstrated that this may be the case. Actually, it has this potential. And the case was related to one of the pro-Islamic State media branches. And usually, when answering questions, Bing Chat provides links for more reading, and one of the links redirected users to a propaganda repository on the Internet Archive. So there is an issue with trusted websites, as I believe all of you know. The Internet Archive has been used for years by a variety of different terrorist organizations. And in this particular case, this repository was treated as a legitimate source of information. And aside from this issue, both platforms could help in identifying keywords, which would be helpful in finding terrorist content online. But frankly, this is not a big problem, given that the same set of terminology can be found even in the scientific literature. So in the second part of the online experiment, I focused on understanding whether these chatbots could replicate terrorist content. And again, the good news is that the Ping chat proved useless in this regard. It was resistant to all the jailbreaks designed. Although ChatGPT was again much more responsive, and it could provide both quotes of some pieces of terrorist propaganda, and also share information on the structure of content of especially prominent flagship magazines. And frankly, most of these responses were inaccurate, more or less. As you can see on the left, it was a prompt related to the Inspire magazine. However, there was one very concerning result. ChatGPT proved to be capable of replicating both the narrative style and also the propaganda devices that are common in extremist propaganda. For instance, it could produce large amounts of text replicating the style and arguments in present in, for instance, Rumia magazine or Dabik magazine of Islamic State. So this is a functionality that could be potentially used to mass produce text propaganda, although at least until now I haven't seen any evidence of it. And the final part of the experiment of the study related to chatbots aimed to verify whether these platforms can generate sensitive information that could be practically utilized by terrorist cells. And unfortunately, the answer is yes. Both platforms could, for instance, produce very sophisticated instructions on cybersecurity, operation security, how to avoid content moderation on the internet, with, for instance, based on the Ethereum name system that's been utilized by Islamic State for at least 2 years now. Or they also advise on what kind of VPNs, virtual private networks, should be used and why, and how to exploit cross-jurisdictional problems to avoid law enforcement agencies. So this is something that usually could be found on terrorist manuals focused on cybersecurity. And one of the platforms tested, namely ChatGPT, could also unfortunately produce more concerning materials such as bomb making instructions or the instructions on the production of toxins. And just to give you one example, it could replicate the 9-step instruction on how to produce a time bomb, which was released by Al Qaeda years ago. So this is a problem, and unfortunately, from what I've seen, this functionality of ChatGPT has been already used by some extremist communities, especially on Telegram, which has shared such instructions since the summer 2023. The good news is that I double checked all the prompts that generated concerning results a couple of months after the end of the experiment, and the vast majority of them were patched. Although unfortunately, new jailbreaks, new prompt engineering ways of getting the same content emerged in the meanwhile. So as for the image generators, which were also part of the study, here I was more interested to learn whether they can be used to increase the quantity of visual propaganda that has the same the same aesthetics as terrorist content. And again, the answer is yes, to a certain extent. They can be utilized to produce photorealistic images. They can be utilized to produce posters, logotypes, advertisement banners. And you have some of my attempts visible on the left. These are results of the prompts which aimed to produce Taliban-themed militants. And the reason they can be used by violent extremists is just to, for instance, avoid operation security challenges by posting the real images. And fortunately, these platforms at the time, so in the first half of 2023, they also had some limitations, especially when it comes to depicting military equipment or weapons. So it usually resulted in glitches which made them useless for propaganda purposes, and they had very little use in production of the core content, which is one of the most popular, if not the most popular type of visual propaganda for terrorists. And before I finish, let me just show you a couple of pictures from and tell you about the newest, I think, trend that's taking place currently in at least some terrorist environments online, which is related to the use of AI. By the way, this is the picture before I move to the final part. This is the picture that attempted to mimic the visuals of Islamic State in 2017-18, so during the fall of the organization. So the most popular way, from what I've seen so far, terrorists use the AIs related to exploiting this kind of software, this kind of technology, to avoid automated content moderation. And there are certain types of AI-based scripts online that can produce they can hide messages or people and pictures of landmarks, which makes some of the automated content moderation procedures useless. So this is the example that originates from Ali Fisher's investigations. As you can see here, we have a Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi in one of the pro-Islamic State channels on WhatsApp. But when we click at the link, we can see the hill with a castle. So it does not match the original picture. Another example that can be found recently in one of the jihadi channels, one of the encrypted communication apps is related to Osama bin Laden. If you narrow your eyes, you will see Osama bin Laden as a World Trade Center tower, which is quite concerning. And the final example is related to actually it was used on social media since October the 7th by the pro-Hamas communities. Again, if you narrow your eyes, you will see the true message. So, long story short, this is the most popular way currently. At least some violent extremist communities are using AI just to prolong the presence on the mainstream most popular platforms. I think that's it from me. Thank you so much, and I'm looking forward to the Q&A session.
Many thanks, Myron, for this this short presentation. Thanks so much, Myron and Marie, to keep it strictly to the clock. I will. So much to say so far, but let's keep our questions and thoughts for the discussion time later on. We still have two panelists, and I will now hand it over to Thomas Hegghammer. Thomas, if you're ready, the floor is yours.
So it says my host has stopped the video.
We can hear you, but we can't. Oh,
right.
That's it. Thank you,
Yes.
Thomas.
Thanks very much, and thanks for inviting me to this. It's a very interesting and important topic. As I see it, AI comes into play for extremism research in three main ways. AI as a weapon for militants. Second, AI as a policing tool, and thirdly, AI as a research tool. And personally, I've been mostly interested in the last two, and especially the last one, AI as a research tool. And over the past year or two, I've spent a lot of time experimenting with large language models and other models for research tasks, for things like semantic search and event extraction, computer vision, automated classification, and so on. But I'm not going to speak about this because I'm so enthusiastic about it that I would end up speaking for too long. But I also have a long-standing interest in the second issue of digital technology as a policing tool. I've long pondered the sort of macro question of whether digital technology helps or hampers terrorists and other political rebels. Because for a long time this wasn't entirely clear, and I wrote a couple of papers about 10 years ago on the utility of jihadi websites for operational activity like attack planning or fundraising and so on, showing that these platforms and tools are force multipliers, but only below a threshold of police repression and infiltration. And above that threshold, trust collapses on these platforms, and rebels can't use them for anything other than propaganda dissemination. And also about 3 years ago, I wrote an article in Foreign Affairs titled "Resistance is Futile," where I basically argued that the long-term trend in the sort of tug of war between states and terrorists was clearly in the states' favor, and that by that point, this was 2020, organized terrorism campaigns had basically become impossible in rich societies like Europe or North America. And this argument rested on three key ideas. One is that the fundamental advantage of terrorists, and in some ways their only advantage, is an information advantage. More specifically, that the state does not know exactly who and where they are. And this is historically, I think, what has allowed groups to survive despite extreme force asymmetry. So when you have a clandestine network in a otherwise functioning state, there's a huge force asymmetry, but it has worked in periods because of this sort of anonymity and clandestinity that they were able to sustain. They had an information advantage. Then the second idea in that paper was that this information advantage has eroded, dwindled over time, because digital technology gives the state better overview of what's going on in society. Ever since the late 1980s, early 1990s, when the computer was kind of seriously introduced in state and government bureaucracies, the state has been getting ever more granular information about individual citizens, and also better coverage, better vision into the entirety of its geographical territory. There are no more any sort of villages or back alleys in Europe where the state does not have vision if it wants. And the third idea in the paper was that this trend had been concealed in some ways by self-imposed political constraints. We, in some ways, didn't realize how powerful our states had become, how powerful our security services had become, because we had laws and norms constraining them. And it was really only when our societies felt really threatened during the ISIS terrorism wave in the mid-2010s that some of these restraints were lifted, and the state could actually wield more of the power that it had at its disposal. And the result, I think, is clear for everyone to see, that jihadism in the West got crushed and is today a shadow of its former self. So, and by the way, this is what I got wrong in my in the article I published in 2016, I think, where I warned about a possible continued rise in European jihadism. I basically hadn't realized how willing European societies, both politicians and publics, would be to ramp up the level of repression and to shed some of these earlier kind of normative and legal protections for human rights and privacy and so on. And so I learned from this that these norms and laws are fragile things, and that states, when they are cornered, will use most of the tools at their disposal. So it's within this kind of long historical framework that I view the rise of artificial intelligence. And indeed, I want to double down on my previous argument and suggest that AI is likely to accentuate the trend that I've already drawn out, and it is probably going to supercharge the state. And I think it's fairly obvious why, what the mechanisms are, what the reasons are for this. Several of them have already been laid out by Maria, and it's about things like increased capacities for processing and classification. So already large language models can do a lot of the things that previously had to be done manually. So this means that analysis can be scaled up significantly, almost infinitely. I mean, it's only kind of a hardware that limits it. And this is very significant because it's been analysis that has been the main bottleneck for decades as far as policing and counterterrorism has been concerned. I would say that for the last 30 years, security services have had more data at their disposal than they could chew. The problem was always labor. But that problem is now in the process of getting solved. It's not entirely solved. We're not probably not talking about a replacement, but we're talking about not about kind of computers replacing analysts, but they're going to make the existing individual analysts able to perform analysis, processing, classification on a much larger scale than in the past. So and it's all kind of about scaling up. So we can, even if it's not possible now, I think we can see how in 5, 10, 20 years, the sort of the problem of digesting access data will, if not be solved, but we will come much closer to solving than we have ever been. And another reason or mechanism is things like semantic search and retrieval, that you can, where you previously was sort of dependent on kind of keyword searches and kind of playing around with creative uses of regex and whatnot, and to sort of find what you wanted. These LLMs will find the things you intend, even though it's not literally present in the text or in the database. And relatedly, language, for example, is no longer a barrier. I mean, there are still things to be ironed out. There are some languages for which automated translation isn't quite as good, but I think this is just a matter of time. Give it 5, 10 years, and automated translation will be close to perfect. And it doesn't matter which language the propaganda or terrorist statement is in. You don't need to hire or to try and go out and find a Pashto speaker or so on to solve your problem. And the third area is computer vision and audio analysis. This has been a huge bottleneck for many years. In fact, in my previous institute at FFI in Oslo, we're sitting on this enormous archive of video that nobody has seen. And I suspect that there are, even today, even in the big services, there is film that no human has viewed, or certainly no human has viewed more than a sort of a limited amount of them, because they're so unwieldy. And there's a lot of information in video, and much suggests that visual propaganda has a huge influence. And so there's this enormous disparity in some ways between our tools, which basically give us very limited visibility into video and audio formats and the impact that we think it has. But now, with the breakthroughs in computer vision and audio transcription of the past 3-4 years, that problem is large, in the process of getting solved. And you can basically get you just put a model on a corpus of videos, and you'll get basically tabulated, extracted metadata for all this in a matter of hours. And relatedly, of course, face recognition is, for all intents and purposes, a solved problem, with all of the huge implications this has for law enforcement. So these are some of the reasons for why I think intelligence services will benefit enormously from artificial intelligence, and they will benefit more than rebels, simply because they are richer and they are institutions and have access to the bigger model. So yes, there will be opportunities for non-state exploitations of some of these things, but in the long run, I think there will be a kind of out-resourced by by states. And similarly, there are, of course, technical limitations still. These models hallucinate, they put 6 fingers on people, etc. But I think we shouldn't pay too much attention to that. I see a clear parallel here to chess computers in the 1990s. I'm nerdy enough to have been a chess player for a long time, and I remember in the early 90s when people were trying to make chess computers, and in the beginning, the early 90s, people making fun of these computers, saying, "Oh, look at the silly mistakes it's making." But then a few years later, it wasn't funny anymore because the computer was beating everybody. So I see the recent LLM revolution, ChatGPT, etc., not as an sort of end state and so on. It's a proof of concept, and now it's just a matter of scaling it up, giving it time, and it will, I think, gradually go quite far. And we should not underestimate the effect of this sort of the scaling up and the giving it time dimension. Let me just finish with a few kind of limitations to my argument. Of course, I think, as with every new technology, there will be disruptive periods where you haven't reached equilibrium, and where there might be a particular kind of variant of AI that will be usable to rebels and for which states haven't found a solution. So there will be disruptive periods where we might see use of this. We might also see single events. So, a group or an individual or a group that will, rise from nowhere to carry out one incident. Because this falls outside of the scope of my argument, which is really about organized activism, and how difficult it is to sustain an organization over time in our kind of surveillance societies. But that doesn't apply as much to actors who are interested in just doing one thing once. So there are risks there. And also, I think it doesn't apply to societies and states and areas where the state isn't as strong and rich. So it doesn't affect, say, ISIS in Africa, for example, nor does it affect larger militias like Hamas, for example. And so there's still going to be this sort of gray area or sort of around the rich and stable states where there will still be sort of technological opportunities for rebels. But the bottom line, for me at least, is that I think terrorists and other rebels, they're facing a pretty bleak future in Western societies. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. It's good to hear reassuring news, and especially useful to step back sometime and have these new things in a historical, longer-term perspectives. Thank you, and we'll turn it to our last panelist, Lewis Brace from Exeter. Please, Lewis, the floor is yours.
Thanks, everyone. So I just want to pick up on a couple of bits that were sort of already been covered a little bit by Myron and Thomas. For me, a lot of the work I do sort of looks at sort of terrorist and extremist use of AI. And I think here it's worth breaking what we're seeing down into sort of two categories, the sort of more immediate short term and the sort of longer term. Regarding the former, I think what we've seen is a significant underestimation of the potential significance of audio deepfakes. So visual deepfakes obviously get a lot of attention in both, in the media and in just common conversation because they're visually striking, right? But one thing that seems to sort of slip under the radar quite a bit is that as technology currently stands, it's much easier to create a convincing audio deepfake than it is a actual visual deepfake, right? And this is due to issues such as on the videos, you have to get the lips syncing up with the content correctly and so on. Now, these audio deepfakes, we've seen quite a few of them sort of appear on the internet over the last year, 2 years or so. And most of them done for comedic purposes. I'm sure you've all encountered the examples of like the US presidents playing video games, that kind of stuff. But I want you to sort of imagine a scenario sort of akin to when al-Zawahiri was killed back last year. When you have a sort of more sort of larger sort of international organizations such as that, when the leader is removed, there's often a little bit of an issue about contingency, who's taken over, that kind of stuff. And one could easily see a situation where we're in that scenario and a convincing audio deepfake emerges which claims to be the individual in question talking about recent events that's happened over the last day or two, sharing that online. That could be quite convincing, because some of these audio deepfakes are very convincing in and of themselves. In the longer term, some of the stuff I've sort of been looking at lately concerns sort of generative content, and bits of this have been picked up already by Stefan, Muren, and Thomas, like I said. In terms of AI-generated content, some of the stuff we're seeing now around images is we're seeing the capacity to generate AI images increasing and getting better. There are still many shortcomings with it. So, for example, and most famously, many of these GANs, generative adversarial network, which is pretty much the algorithms that underpin AI-generated images, they have a severe problem generating images of hands. And the reason for that is because all of these AI algorithms are only as good as the data put into them. And when you look at pictures of specific individuals, hands are always doing different things, right, by their very nature. And so at the moment, that's a bit of a giveaway, right? So you often see AI images generated of people with like 6 or 8 fingers, or fingers going in directions that shouldn't be. They shouldn't be, all that kind of stuff. That will change going forward. We're going to start to see these images start to get a bit better. There is some anecdotal evidence emerging at the moment that some sort of more generic AI image generators are starting to produce worse quality images, because there's now so many AI-generated images online that the AI image generators themselves are starting to be trained on some of the AI-generated images. At the moment, that seems to be sort of more generic image type stuff. But if we're looking at the kind of things that sort of extremist actors might be sharing, it'll be a while before we start to see that sort of trickle down, if indeed that proves empirically to be an issue. Another form of content generation, and Stefan touched upon this a little bit, is the use of large language models. We've seen a lot about ChatGPT and so on over the last year and a bit. And ChatGPT is good at sort of generating content. But I think what we often forget at the same time is that there's a large number of other large language models that are out there and available. And some of these models have been shown to produce very convincing extremist content. So there's an example of someone who used a bespoke trained version of GPT to generate posts for 4chan and so on, to an extent that many of the people on there were struggling to tell the difference between the fake posts and the real posts, and indeed were wondering why traffic had suddenly got so busy. This actually took me a little bit by surprise, because when we look at subcultures, online subcultures concerning the far right, the incels, which I've done a lot of work on, those kind of subcultures, they tend to be characterized by distinct terminology, whether that be for the in-groups, out-groups, discussions around various events. They tend to have their own distinct terminology, as all subcultures do. But this specific ChatGPT implementation had found a way to sort of mimic that pretty well. Stefan himself has done some work looking at this, and I'm sure he can plug that work in the future. But we're starting to see this stuff become more and more convincing. It's worth noting that when we talk about these large language models, the companies who produce them, whether that be OpenAI or Facebook, whatever, the companies that put them forward. They've started to say, you know, they put fail safes in place to sort of stop people being able to generate this content, which is all well and good. The intention there is obviously a noble one, but what we often forget is that these online communities that are engaged with this content, a lot of it tends to be open source. So we tend to see a lot of individuals who are taking the specific trained models as they exist, with the specific weights on the neural networks as they exist, and then being able to tinker with them in a way, just in such a way they sort of gets around the safeguards. I can explain some of the technical details on that in the Q&A if anyone's interested. But the reason these sort of images and these AI-generated images and this AI-generated content is of concern to me sort of stems to a couple of the sort of broader patterns we're seeing, both in the wider information environment and in terms of extremist radicalization in general. So we've seen a change in, so if we look at deliberate disinformation being pumped out online, obviously over the last decade or so, we've seen a shift towards low quality, high frequency content. Now, needless to say, that AI generated images and content is going to sort of exacerbate that. As Thomas said, it can act as a force multiplier, and that it can produce more content. And if you factor into that the work that is being done, that's looked at the nature of how online spaces are linked together in an ecosystem. Again, Stefan mentioned this at the start. We see that a large number of these online spaces are all linked together. Sometimes there's an anchor point of the community, sometimes there's not, but we see that these communities are all linked together. And once you start to get, and you see that they tend to post between these online spaces with a larger amount of frequency. So once you start to combine these two factors, you start to see a large amount of this content being shared frequently and at speed. But then if you factor into this some of the changes we're starting to see in the radicalization landscape over the last few years, we've started to see the sort of emergence of more and more sort of self-radicalized lone actor individuals, individuals who have been radicalized not by being targeted by specific content, but just through the nature of their interactions with specific online spaces. The Christchurch shooter is often the main example used here, but we've seen it with the Poway synagogue shooter, many of the other far-right shooters, some of the intel attackers I've been looking at over the last year or so. And why this AI content is of interest to me with this specific group is that if you have a large organization, such as your Al-Qaeda, your ISIS, or so on, using AI to generate content, then there tends to be an active community there who sort of critique it and work out whether, and sort of try and work out whether this is a legitimate message from the quote-unquote leader or leadership team, whatever. But when we look at these sort of self-radicalized individuals, these are individuals who are radicalized just through absorbing content online, right? It's a self-organizing system. There's no one bespoke leader. So as a result of that, there's less sort of collective scrutiny of content. Yes, you might see individuals sort of on threads show a piece of AI-generated image and say, this is clearly nonsense for X, Y, and Z reasons. But you increase the chances in these kind of communities, you increase the chances of there being less group skepticism around a piece. And if you've got an individual slowly sort of going down a radicalizing rabbit hole, and they are absorbing a whole bunch of real content, but then they start to get some of this AI content stuff as well, you're likely to see less of that sort of group criticism. And it's likely to just feed into the overall sort of input that they are receiving. And I think this becomes even more of an issue. And again, this was touched upon a minute ago, when we look at some of the sort of profile changes we're seeing of individuals being prosecuted for engaging in this content. So in the UK over the last few years, we've started to see a rise in individuals being prosecuted under our Terrorism Act or for having and sharing extremist content who are increasingly young. And I mean quite young, sort of 13 in some respects. And I think this is sort of linked to a wider issue we're seeing of younger people, all people, All age demographics are obviously spending more time online. But what we're seeing from various surveys being done by Ofcom and so on is that although all age groups are spending more time online, this is particularly the case with the younger generations of people. And I think this sort of links into the sort of wider pattern we're seeing of some of these younger individuals who are starting to combine different bits of ideology together to sort of form their own bespoke ideology. And I think that some of this AI generated content, because it would act as a force multiplier and therefore increase the amount of these different ideas sort of circulating in the various ecosystems, it will both increase the chance of it spreading to more mainstream ecosystems and also increase the chances of these individuals who are perhaps already susceptible to it absorbing more of this content and sort of feeding into their process. And on that rather nihilistic note, I'll sort of end my little speech.
Thank you, Lewis. Very well.